We wanted to track a part of that campaign to actually measure its effectiveness. Did you get the number of folks who needed to register in order to hit your goal? If not, then let's look back at the other pieces of data to be able to see where did we have a leak in our process. Welcome back to another episode of the Seven Figure Educator podcast. My name is Dr. Erica Jordan Thomas. I am your host. I'm a former teacher, former principal, Harvard grad, and CEO and founder of EJT Education Group. During today's episode, we're going to talk about marketing because marketing is one of the topics that I believe is most mistaught when we're talking about business strategy. I believe that marketing is mostly watered down when it comes to how we teach marketing, how we talk about marketing, that we're missing actually the most important parts of what makes marketing actually marketing. So during this episode, I actually want to break down what does effective marketing look like when you're thinking about building, growing, and scaling your seven-figure education consulting business. So let's actually jump into defining what marketing is. So I define marketing as the art of driving traffic to your business and or building awareness about your business. So oftentimes people confuse or they use interchangeably marketing and sales when they're actually two completely different arms of your business. Marketing is the act of driving attention to your business, of building awareness about your business, of generating traffic to your business. And then once you have that traffic, sales is the art of taking that traffic and then converting those leads, qualifying those leads, and converting them into clients. So let's first start with talking about what are some of the biggest mistakes that I see people making with marketing. The first mistake that I see people making with marketing is that they are overemphasizing marketing tactics versus a marketing strategy. So what I mean by marketing tactics, most of the time when I ask people, well, when you think of the word marketing, what comes to mind? People would say social media or email. They might say speaking. They would be naming tactics that generate traffic, but that's not actually the essence of marketing. Marketing actually is having a strategy, and your strategy might include social media, it might include email, it might include the tactic of speaking, but that within itself is not marketing. I like to think of marketing really as a campaign because that's where the strategy lives. So a marketing campaign is an intentionally designed, organized steps that are centered around a particular objective in your business and defined outcomes. So a really great example of marketing campaigns is if you just think about your everyday life of when you are engaging with commercials or you're engaging on social media, 9 times out of 10, you're engaging with somebody's marketing campaign. I will tell you someone who had a genius marketing campaign, Usher Raymond. When we're talking about his Super Bowl performance, it wasn't just the social media post about his tour. It wasn't just the social media post about his album dropping. It was a whole entire campaign where we had the tour that was dropped prior to, or it was either before or after the actual Super Bowl halftime show. We had his album that dropped the Friday before the halftime show. He had strategic partnerships and sponsorships leading up to the actual Super Bowl performance. So he was taking all these actions to generate attention, to build awareness. He was on Club Shay Shay as a podcast interview. He was on the news with Gayle King, and he had that interview. He engaged in a partnership with Skims, Kim K's brand, even though I don't mess with Kim K, but it was a partnership, right? Where Kim K posted Usher in her newest Skims campaign, and she has over 300 million followers, right? So even if just 1% of those followers took the action to buy his album, we're talking 3 million album downloads, which is huge, absolutely huge. So we're always consistently engaging with marketing campaigns. We oftentimes just water them down to the actual tactics, the tactics of posting on social media or the tactics of sending an email. I even got a text message from Usher's campaign around his ticket sales for his tour, because I was on that text message list for the Vegas residency. So now they're spinning the block and dropping a text message sequence. All of these things are under the umbrella of a marketing campaign. We're talking about an intentional sequence of steps that are driving towards a particular outcome of generating awareness and building traffic in your business. I'm jumping in real quick to make sure that you know about my scorecard, which is the opportunity for you to get clear on what stage of business you're in. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, I want you to go back and check out the episode that I have around the 3 stages of business. And I developed this scorecard so that way you can get quick clarity around A, what stage you are in business, and B, the specific action steps given that stage, so that way you can execute immediately. So go ahead, scroll down to the show notes, and I want you to click the link for the Get Launch Consulting Scorecard. Take that quiz so that way you have clarity on your stage of business. Let's hop back into the episode. So that's the first misstep that I see people making, is that they're overemphasizing tactics that aren't undergirded with some type of larger strategy. So I'm assuming for Usher, it was likely, I want to sell out X amount of tour stops. And so in order to sell out X amount of tour stops, how many people actually have to see our content? And then what would be the strategies to get X amount of people to see this content in order to take that action? Well, if we have this partnership, if we send this text message, if we send this email, that, my friends, is an entire marketing campaign. The second misstep that I see people making is just a lack of planning. Like, well, if we were to use the Usher example, you can't just pop up in a Skins campaign a week before, right? Like, you can't plan those types of things 1 week, 2 weeks out, where a really thorough and intentional marketing campaign is planned in advance. So I probably execute, me and my team, maybe 1 to 2, sometimes 3 marketing campaigns in a month. And those at minimum are planned out 3 to 6 months ahead of time at minimum. Some of our larger campaigns, we're actually planning out a year ahead of time. So this lack of planning actually will in the end hurt you in your objectives in your campaign, because you just simply aren't giving yourself the gift of planning. And then the last misstep that I see people making is they just start too late. So they wait until the week before the webinar or 2 weeks before the webinar to actually kick off their marketing campaign, when the reality is you should actually be seeding what's coming up way in advance. So if you can decide 3 months ahead of your webinar when the webinar date is, yes, you might have a 2 to 3 week promotional period where the call to action is to register. But if you know 3 weeks out of that webinar campaign that you're going to have a webinar on this particular date, you might decide 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time to actually start dripping certain content related to your webinar topic to start priming your audience for what's to come. So when you give yourself the gift of time, you can actually be more sophisticated in the nurturing that you're doing with your audience to get them ready for what the outcome is of that campaign. So let's actually break down the parts of a marketing campaign. We're going to keep this at a high level, and I'm sharing this from my experience as someone who has executed and ran multiple marketing campaigns. When we're talking about the components of a marketing campaign, the first place to start is just, what's the overview of the campaign? Like, what's happening? What are some of the things that we need to know? What are important dates? So if we're talking about a webinar, the overview might be what's the topic of the webinar. It might be what are the purpose of the webinar. It might be an overview of when you're going to start promoting versus when you're going to make the offer, the date and which is the deadline for the offer. So the overview of the campaign is simply just giving a high level detail of what is this campaign. One, from a bird's eye view, what is the components or moving parts, important dates related to this campaign. So you also want to be clear on what your objectives are for the campaign. Is your objective to generate revenue? Is your objective to simply build awareness? Is your objective to generate leads? Not every marketing campaign has the objective of generating revenue. You could have a marketing campaign that is building awareness, or generating leads that is just driving attention to you and your business. So by identifying and being clear on that objective, again, it's going to help you get clear on the resources that you need, your timeline, what particular marketing channels will make the most sense for your campaign. And then you want to identify your target audience. So your target audience is who are you gearing this campaign towards? So you might have many different segments in your audience, or there might be particular people who you want to target during this campaign. That target audience helps you define and be clear around who actually do you need to get in front of. Then you want to identify your marketing channels. So this is where, when I named the misstep of folks overemphasizing marketing tactics, when people aren't thinking from the mind frame of a campaign, they just go straight to marketing channels, which is just all the tactics. But when you're intentional about knowing the overview of your campaign, when you're intentional about who your audience is, you can be more intentional around the marketing channels that you use to actually communicate to that audience. So there are some campaigns where actually social media doesn't make sense for the campaign. But if you don't have that level of clarity of the overview of your campaign or who your audience is, then you could be risking actually pouring time and resources into a channel that actually doesn't make the most sense. So when I'm saying channels, I mean, what are all the different ways that you could be communicating with your audience? So the first thing that typically comes to mind for most people is social media, is email. You also have podcasting. You have going live. You could go live on LinkedIn. You could go live on Facebook. You could go live on Instagram. We have SMS, so text messaging. You could use the marketing channel of ringless voicemails, where you can push out a message if you have phone numbers for your audience. You could be using DMs. Maybe you decide to use a DM strategy. There's lots of different channels that you could be leveraging. You could be leveraging paid ads. So what are all the different ways that you could be getting in front of your audience? And you want to clarify the channels you're going to prioritize during that campaign. And then what's the timeline? So given the campaign, do you need to have certain resources created by a certain timeline? Do you need to have the campaign go live or launch on a particular day? Does registration open on a particular day? Does registration close on a day? Does the offer become available on a particular day? Is there some type of bonus that if people make a decision by a certain date or timeline that they get access to a bonus? Is there a date in which that bonus is no longer available? So getting really clear on the timeline. And the more complex your campaign is, the larger your team is, the more detail you need to be around that timeline, because now you have multiple people who have tasks and they need to know their deadlines for their tasks assigning the campaign. What are all the resources you need? So do you need emails? If so, how many emails? Do you need social media posts? Do you need social media graphics? Do you need captions? Do you need scripts for DMs? Given the marketing channels that you listed, now what are all of the aligned resources that you're going to need in order to actually leverage those marketing channels? So if you're leveraging social media, you're probably going to need some type of pictures or graphics, right? So the resources is the time to get really clear on what are all the things that we need in order to effectively execute this campaign. And then what's your budget? So for some marketing campaigns, you may not have a budget, but then there's some marketing campaigns where maybe you decide to run ads or you decide to invest in the campaign in order to set you up to reach your outcomes. That's what you want to identify in that budget phase of how much money are you dedicating towards the campaign. And then lastly, what's your criteria for success? So your criteria for success are the data that you're going to track to actually know whether or not the campaign was effective. So if you're running a webinar, you probably want to know how many people are registered, how many people show up live, how many people actually convert at the end with whatever the call to action is, how many people actually went to the page for the webinar, how many people clicked on the page. So there's many different directions that you could go with the actual criteria for success, so that way you know whether or not the campaign was effective. So those are some things to think about when you are pulling your campaign together, when you're developing your campaign. So let me give you a couple of examples of some potential marketing campaigns. And now you want to lean into, as much as possible, your own creativity. You want to lean into what is going to be attractive and gain the attention of your audience. So these are just pretty basic examples, but the more fun you can have with it, the more effective your campaign is going to be. So if you are speaking at a conference, you could have a marketing campaign with the objective of building awareness around the fact that you're speaking at a conference, right? So the goal isn't necessarily revenue. The goal is, I want to continue to establish myself as an authority and as an expert in this space. So I want to build awareness around the fact that I'm speaking at this really well-known conference. So your marketing campaign could look like, leading up to the conference, you have some strategic content that's announcing that you're a speaker. You could have some BTS, behind the scenes content, of you preparing your slides, of you practicing, of you getting ready, of you booking your travel, of you packing to get ready to go to the conference. And then when the actual conference happens, you could send an email to your email list and give a recap of, this is what's getting ready to happen for today. And here's some key points from my presentation, or here's what I'm looking forward to. And then you could go live while you're actually at the conference, before or after, and actually debrief how the experience went. And then if you have a freebie or a resource that you gave out to the audience, the follow-up to the keynote might be actually sending that freebie to your email list. So even though they weren't there, they still have the benefit and opportunity of still gleaning the wisdom that you gave out at the conference. So that's a really great example of a marketing campaign that just builds awareness, right? And the impact of that is, it's establishing you as an expert, because people don't know things you don't tell them. Right? You got to own your narrative. And so if you were at a conference, this is a great way to share your narrative of the fact that someone saw you as an expert enough to ask you of your time to share your expertise with an audience. And you could build a whole marketing campaign around that. Another example of a marketing campaign could be around a theme, or month or week or holiday that is relevant to your audience. So for example, my audience is Black educators. A time of the year that's really special in education is Teacher Appreciation Week. So you could structure a whole campaign around Teacher Appreciation Week, where you have, leading up to Teacher Appreciation Week, you could be counting down until Teacher Appreciation Week, and you could be posting questions around the impact that teachers have had in the lives of your audience. You could tell people to share stories of different teachers. You could have people share why teachers are so important as a way to engage your audience. So the objective for this campaign might be awareness, but also engagement. And then when Teacher Appreciation comes, you might decide to do giveaways, where you do 5 days of giveaways during Teacher Appreciation Week. And maybe the call to action on social media is comment or tag someone below in order to be entered into the giveaway. And so the impact of this type of campaign is, again, it's building awareness, because everyone who gets tagged is now seeing your content, is now someone who's being introduced to you, but also you're acknowledging and appreciating teachers. And then maybe on the back end of Teacher Appreciation Week, you might decide to tell your story as a teacher, as an educator, or you might decide to have students share stories and their perspective around teachers that have impacted their lives. So that's just kind of a different example that I wanted to offer up, because again, campaigns don't always have to have the goal of generating money, but they could have other goals like engagement or awareness, and those are still really effective campaigns. And then I'll just give you one last example of a campaign that does have the objective of generating revenue. So if you're doing a webinar, you need to have a marketing campaign, right? So let's say you pick your date for your webinar and you decide that the objective is to generate revenue. And then 6 to 8 weeks prior to the webinar, you decide to start actually dropping some teaser content. And so given whatever the topic is of the webinar, you're strategically dropping content related to that same topic to just get people's interest piqued. And then 2 to 3 weeks prior to the webinar, you're actually now starting to push out information around registering for the webinar. You're pushing it out to social media. You're pushing it out to your email list. You're going live to talk about how excited you are with the webinar. You might decide to do a live series with different people to talk more about the problem that you're going to be addressing during the webinar. You could write an article. You could write a blog about the topic that, again, you're going to be diving in deeper to in your webinar. And at the end of that blog is the call to action to actually register. And then at the webinar, you have a call to action of actually taking the offer, right? So you present this call to action of whatever your offer is. You identify a date by which folks need to take action. And then following the webinar, you're actually following up with that call to action on whatever that timeline is that you've identified for that particular offer. And then once that campaign has concluded, we're looking at all of the data that we said we wanted to track a part of that campaign to actually measure its effectiveness. Did you get the number of folks who needed to register in order to hit your goal? If not, then let's look back at the other pieces of data to be able to see, where did we have a leak in our process? Did we just not get enough people to look at the page? Did we not get enough people to actually click on the button? Did our email open rate, it wasn't as solid as it could have been? Now you have the opportunity to kind of do an autopsy of your marketing campaign to really analyze the effectiveness of what went really well so you can run the play again, or what you want to tweak for next time. So that's marketing campaigns at a really high level, 7-figure marketing, again, at a really high level. And it's my hope that through sharing this information, through having this conversation, that you're thinking about marketing a little bit differently. So let me know in the comments what sticks out for you, what resonated with you. Did you have an aha? I would love to know if this episode felt really meaningful for you. Leave a review and let me know what your thoughts are. And if you are really excited about this content and you found it meaningful, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that way you know when the next episode drops. We'll catch you on the next time of 7-Figure Educator, the podcast.